All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. As always, I'm your host, JK, and we are kicking off a very quick episode where I want to share some perspective and my point of view on something that's talked about pretty regularly within the self-improvement habit building space, and that is the 1% better theory. Before getting into today's episode any deeper, though, I do, as always, want to say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I know that you have a lot of different podcasts that you can consume these days, no shortage at all. So I truly never take it for granted that you chose to press play on Help Me Understand. I will ask for one small favor, is that you pass this podcast episode on to one or more people that you believe could benefit from hearing the perspective that I share today. So if you deem this particular episode worthy, then please pass this on at the end of today's episode. With that, let's get into some thoughts that I've got, again, perspective and opinion that I'd like to share with you on the theory of becoming 1% better. So my first official structured introduction to the 1% better theory or the 1% better idea was when I read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. I believe that based on what I'm aware of the majority of the audience for this particular podcast, many people are familiar with the book Atomic Habits. It's a book that came out a few years ago and really has been basically touted as kind of an instant classic within the self-improvement and goal achievement space. And there are certainly other books within that particular space. I believe Charles Duhigg wrote a book called Tiny Habits, if I remember correctly. I haven't read that particular one. However, that's another one that I believe comes across in this same space. However, getting back to this. So my first introduction to the idea of 1% better came from reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. And in the book, what he does near the very beginning is he talks about this example from a British cycling team back in the early 2000s and what they did to improve the performance of this particular cycling team was to make small improvements versus looking at going in and making a complete big overhaul. So one of the examples, if I remember correctly, was improving the comfort of the bike seats. Like that's one that from memory stands out to me. That was a small change that they made in the name of stacking small improvements over time to eventually turn them basically from worst to first. And that example is given along with, I remember another example being trying to improve or basically reduce or minimize particular spread of disease. And one of the things that was implemented was what was framed as a small habit change, or 1% change in educating people about washing their hands and providing resources for people to slowly but surely start to regularly implement the act of washing their hands in order to attack a much larger issue, or it was a tactic to improve a large issue, which was the spread of disease. So those are just a couple of examples that come to mind. Now, the whole idea is that instead of what is traditionally looked at as the way to attack habit change being, I'm going to sit down, make this very detailed, from start to finish, multi-step plan for how I'm going to basically rework my entire life and become a completely different person and put in all of these crazy steps. The idea of the 1% theory is to make small, tiny changes that stack and compound over time. So the example again, and this is just me paraphrasing given in the book Atomic Habits, is the idea of compound interest. So to use compound interest in a money example, it's like first, it's not about saving $500. It could be that you save $100 one month and then you let that money earn interest of 1% over time. Or you save $100 and then, not getting so like caught up in the 1% piece of it, maybe the next month you aren't able to save $100, you can save $20. So instead of looking at it almost like an all or nothing sort of a thing where it's like, well, if I can't save 100, I'm not going to save anything. Well, if you could save $20, would that still be better than saving nothing? So it would still be a tiny improvement from what your history maybe has been over the previous 6 months, let's say. Where this really came to mind today and what I really want to share my perspective on is I was at the gym, and I'll use an example where I have a particular movement and I was at about 250 pounds loaded for that particular movement. And I had worked to getting, I think it was like maybe 9 or 10 reps of that particular movement at 250 pounds. So I'm getting ready to do my last set, and I'm thinking I want to increase this. I think a 5-pound increase, I could possibly do it, but I'm not totally sure just based on like by the time I hit like the last rep in the set where I was doing 250, I was starting to get pretty wiped. And we have these little change plates that we have at my gym. I'll try and maybe I'll post a picture in my Instagram stories to kind of explain this, but they're basically little magnetic, they're called power plate, and they're magnetic, and they can be attached to plates, they can be attached to machines, that sort of a thing. In this particular case, I was using a machine, and I looked at the plates and I wasn't sure if 5 pounds was going to work. So these particular little plates, these little change plates or fractional plates, I'll call them, they were available for me to add 2.5 pounds, which just came to me as I was going through this process of deciding, okay, how much weight am I going to add? Because I can add something, but 5 feels like I may not get to the reps that I want to get to for sure, like the minimum number of reps I want to do. So remember, I'm at 250 at this time. 5 seems like it's going to be a little bit too much. So with these fractional plates, I was able to add 2.5 pounds, which happens to equal 1%. And to be straight up with you, the first thing that popped into my head was, what difference is 2.5 pounds really going to make on this? And then I thought to myself, man, that's kind of wild, because 2.5 pounds is 1% of 250 pounds. Slapped the plates on, was able to get the reps that I was looking for. In fact, +1. I was able to get a little one more rep than I thought I was going to be able to get. And then, shocker, I decided to do another set and add 2.5 more pounds. So I could have done 5, but that's beside the point. What it reminded me of was it's so easy to talk about the importance of sticking to this theory of 1%, or the importance of really believing and exhibiting and living this whole, hey, I'm just trying to get 1% better. When the reality of when you're in that particular moment, that 1% better doesn't feel like you're actually getting any better. It's hard for me to say. It doesn't actually feel like you're really getting better, or at least for me in that moment, it didn't. So going from 250 to 252.5, I pondered, like, is this really enough to make all that much of a difference? And again, that's kind of how I think about, and my perspective on this idea of the 1% theory is that a lot of times when you're getting 1% better, it may not actually feel to you like you're actually getting 1% better, because it is such a marginal, and to use the example of these plates, it's such a fractional difference that you truly, along with talking about and doing the things that are linked to this 1% better theory, you also have to, in my opinion, have a certain amount of confidence and belief, and certainly an immense amount of patience to really stick with the understanding that 1% eventually over time stacks up and does compound. And I believe, again, from my perspective, that 1%, that 1% change, or the 1% better, it's more of a challenge than I believe people really, really, truly understand until you're in it and you've actually been doing it and sticking with it for a while. It's very easy to post something inspirational about the importance of 1% better and the importance of compound interest and what they talk about in Atomic Habits with the aggregation of marginal gains. It's so easy to talk about that stuff. It's a very different ballgame when you actually are in it and staying in it. So even something I've referenced in previous episodes, based on the people that I work with more often than not, getting started isn't the hardest part. Continuing to keep going is hands down the hardest thing to do because you are truly just working with these very fractional, marginal gains, like sticking with that thing, sticking with that habit over time without having a whole lot of excitement around it, a whole lot of flash, a whole lot of external validation, maybe. You may not even really see what the results are, or even if you do see what those results are, it's easy to minimize those results because that's the thing. Those results and those milestones, I guess is a better phrase for me to use. They're so minimal. And that's the whole idea. I think there's a difference between acknowledging that something is a minimal improvement versus minimizing the improvement that you've made. So acknowledging that something is a minimal improvement to me means, okay, I'm acknowledging that I still have 15 pounds to lose. I'm using a hypothetical example. I'm acknowledging that based on the range that I think that I want to end up in, I still have 15 pounds to lose. I am acknowledging that 1 pound or 1.5 pounds is a minimal improvement in the grand scheme of 15 pounds. Minimizing that would be saying 1.5 pounds isn't improvement. So that's kind of the word play, the wordsmithing that I do for both myself and my clients to remind them that, and remind myself, because I practice this same thing on myself very, very regularly, that there can be recognition of improvement in something that doesn't have to also be degradation of what that improvement has been. So I'm not sure that I'm articulating this extremely well. And also, I'm thinking it how I'm saying it, that if you are somebody who has believed or has really bought into the theory of getting 1% better, then cool, like you're my people. And also, something that perhaps in the circles that you're in isn't talked about as much is how difficult it can be to truly stay committed as you go through this process of 1% better. Because again, I cannot say this enough. The most difficult thing is that 1% better typically doesn't look even like it's 1% better. And that's something that if you're going to stick with what you say that you're going to do, if you're going to stick with being able to slowly shift your identity and shift your belief, then it's something that you have to stay committed to and understand that 1% is legit 1%. And more often than not, I promise I mean this to be encouraging, and I want to be realistic. More often than not, becoming 1% better becomes more and more and more difficult as you gain more experience and as you start to get deeper and deeper into the game. And I'm talking about anything from a fitness standpoint, whether it has to do with getting stronger, whether it has to do with getting leaner, whatever it may be, if it's something that's related to some of your habits. So sleep, like getting just a little bit better at sleep. Like, can you imagine like, okay, well, I got 8 hours of sleep and then I'm just using a random example. Okay, then I got 8 hours and 8 minutes more of sleep. You're thinking to yourself, that's not really that big of a deal. So the challenge is, can you stick with it long enough for that 8 hours and 8 minutes to perhaps become 8 hours, 8.5 hours, And for those of us who are early risers, that additional 20 to 30 minutes of sleep could make a whole world of difference depending on what you've got going on. My point is, are you willing to stick with the theory of 1% better when it doesn't feel like you're actually getting any better at all? So that's what I wanted to make today's episode about. If this connected with you, engaged you in any way, shape, or form, hit me up. Let me know what your thoughts are. The 1% better theory. Is this news to you? If it is, let me know. Is it something that you've thought about in the perspective that I've shared with you? Or have you not? Whatever the case may be, let me know. You can also let me know on Spotify comments. You can leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. My contact info is in the show notes. There's a lot of different ways to send in feedback, because sometimes I wonder, like, is there anybody else out there who's thinking about this from this particular aspect? Because I know I've had a few conversations here and there with people who definitely are on that same wavelength, and that's always encouraging and interesting. And then there's a large part of me that is also very curious to know, is there someone else out there who's experienced this sort of a thing? And it doesn't have to be, fitness related. Again, that's primarily the lane that I operate in. So that's how I filter a lot of these things. Really beneath the fitness layer is habit change, habit implementation. And that's something that is applicable across multiple categories, whether it be fitness, whether it be parenting, whether it be something going on from a career development standpoint, whatever the case may be. I believe that this idea of compounding interest and getting 1% better, like getting reality of what that really looks like, can be so helpful across multiple categories. So with that, we are going to wrap up today's episode. And a friendly reminder, this episode, along with every episode going forward, is sponsored by Feed Your Habits, feedyourhabits.com. Hop on there, check out what we have to offer: t-shirts, sweatshirts. Got some new things coming down the line in May. Feedyourhabits.com is apparel for people who believe that habits don't grow on their own, they get fed. So if you hop on to feedyourhabits.com and use my promo code in all caps, JKFYH, and there'll be a link in the show notes. So use my promo code JKFYH in all caps at checkout. You will get, along with free shipping in the United States, you'll get 10% off of your order. So that is going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. I appreciate it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.